Chapter 9. Whatever resolutions I had made concerning my professional conduct since waking up in Tanner's bed had clearly not taken, as I was waking up this morning in Hudson's bed. I probably should have seen this as me making a bad situation worse, further undermining the morally shaky ground I found myself. But I actually felt less guilty this morning. I didn't feel the urge to make myself scarce as quickly as possible. Quite the reverse, in fact. I wanted to stay. I was still kidding myself a bit that sticking around was a good way to investigate the brothers, but every moment I spent with these guys made me less able to believe that they were killers. The fact that several of the moments I had spent with them I had spent being fucked probably made that less of a valid opinion, but I wasn't just thinking with my downstairs. I've been an investigator for long enough to know when something doesn't add up. And something about this sure as hell didn't. While Hudson slept on, I cautiously lifted the covers and peered under. He was hard even as he slept. So much sexual energy in that guy. I hoped he was dreaming of me. I slipped out of bed, dressed, and headed out of his room, shutting the door carefully behind me so as not to wake him. Where now? I was determined to stay, at least until I knew that Gray was out of danger. Until then, I was ravenously hungry after the night's activities. A maid came out of one of the other rooms and smiled at me without any show of surprise at my being there. Strange women coming out of Hudson's bedroom first thing in the morning were probably not that unusual. Can you point me to the kitchen? I asked. A few minutes later, I trotted down the cold stone steps that led to the basement kitchen. It was a big old-fashioned farmhouse kitchen made to cater for dozens rather than the three brothers and handful of servants it currently served. Morning light flooded in through diagonally sunk shafts in the walls that led up to skylights. Standing at the long range encrusted with years of burned and blackened grease, Tanner stood, wearing an apron as he fried eggs and bacon. The apron was a necessity as the food spat hot oil as he cooked, and apart from the apron he was naked. It occurred to me, in between long lingering looks at Tanner's ass, that the eldest of the Kenai brothers had been no part of last night's operation to rescue Gray. Had he perhaps been out of town, only returning this morning? Or had there been some other reason that neither Hudson nor Gray had thought to call him? I saw his head twitch slightly as I came closer and guessed that he had caught my scent over the smell of cooking bacon and egg. Good morning, Miss Malone. Didn't expect to see you here. And yet my presence did not seem to bother him. Breakfast. That would be great. I was too hungry to worry much about the potential awkwardness of bumping into the guy I slept with so recently, having just slept with his brother. One thing at a time. Tanner nodded, shoveled the bacon and egg onto a plate for me, and began to make more for himself. There's coffee in the machine. He nodded towards it. I poured myself a cup and seated myself at the big, rough-hewn table in the middle of the room. I thought you'd have cooks or something. Tanner shook his head. Wolves don't like anybody else messing with their food. You have to live with them to know things like that. He flipped the bacon. Seems to me that there was some stuff going on in this house last night that I didn't know about. Any chance you'd like to tell me about it? I took a swallow of coffee and then a deep breath. The one thing that werewolves could not abide in their sexual relationships was dishonesty. I slept with Hudson. Tanner laughed. You have a unique approach to murder investigation. Attempted murder, I reminded him. For now. He cracked an egg onto the range. The longer you spend investigating us in your own unusual fashion, the greater the chance the real killer will strike again. I didn't sleep with you as part of any investigation. Probably not what he was expecting me to say, but it had been burning at me and I wanted to say it. Tanner looked at me and I saw in his eyes that he wanted to believe it. I followed you because of the investigation. I fought with you because, well, it seemed like the thing to do. But everything else that happened between us was what I wanted. As an investigator, it was perhaps the dumbest thing I've ever done, but I don't regret it for an instant. And I know that. Maybe a weird thing to say when I slept with your brother last night, but it's true. Do you regret sleeping with him? Asked Tanner. No, I admitted. I didn't set out to make a habit of it, but things happened and I'm not sorry they did. Again, I realize this is weird. Tanner scoffed as he joined me at the table. It's only weird if you're human. When Hudson wakes up, which won't be for a while, he is not an early riser, I guarantee the first thing he will do is come see me to tell me that he mated with you last night. because he knows that I mated with you a few nights before. That's how it is with us. As long as there is honesty and openness, then there is no jealousy. Doesn't preclude sex, or even love. He shot me a look across the table before his dark eyes returned to his food. It's good that you told me. Perhaps the wolf in you made you do it. He smiled, his handsome face becoming suddenly still more handsome. I smiled back, feeling more comfortable now than I had since coming in. That was werewolves for you. It wasn't a problem that I had slept with both of them, and though nothing specific had been said, I got the feeling that it wouldn't be a problem if I slept with either or both again. Not that I was necessarily thinking of it, but good to know. Interesting though this conversation has been, Tanner went on, when I asked about what was going on last night. You and Hudson having a bit of fun was not what I had in mind. I avoided his gaze. Hudson had presumably kept Gray's adventure to himself for a reason, and it was not my secret to tell. On the other hand, it was not that big a house, and he was going to learn of it sooner or later. Gray got into a fight. I decided to keep the details as sparse as I could. He was badly hurt. He's fine, I added quickly as I saw fear flood into Tanner's eyes. But Hudson got a doctor in just in case. And they called you? Tanner was not slow on the uptake. Yes. I saw the thoughts pursuing each other across his face. He was in Hawkeye territory again, wasn't he? My plan to keep the details on the cutie hadn't gone so well. I swallowed the last forkful of egg and washed it down with the dregs of my coffee. Thanks for breakfast. Are you trying to put me off? I'm sure Hudson will be down soon. You really haven't gotten to know him yet, have you? And he will be able to explain everything to you. Yes, I bet he can't wait, said Tanner, darkly but not cruelly. For all that wild side of his nature that his father so deplored, he was clearly the strict older brother, keeping an eye on the antics of his younger siblings. Both of them idiots. I raised an eyebrow. Wouldn't catch you crossing the boundaries like that. Tanner couldn't help smiling as I pushed back my chair and headed out of the kitchen. Though I had initially been concerned about seeing him for obvious reasons, in the event I had been pleased to bump into Kenai Tanner, and breakfast had been thoroughly pleasant. That said, I couldn't let the case slip from my mind completely. I was in one of the key sites of the crime, the place to which the would-be assassin had been trailed before disappearing without a trace. Decided to have a walk about the place to get my bearings and see if I could figure out where the man might have gone. The Kenai werewolves had followed his trail to the hall, off of which led several other rooms, none of which had yielded any absolute sign. Opinion was that he might have gone into each of those rooms, so his scent and that of his blood was in all of them. I visited each of the rooms, casting an eye about, and finding nothing suspicious. I then walked around the adjoining corridors. After this, I did the exact same thing again, then went back around in reverse. Sometime on that third time around, something started to bother me. It was not anything specific at first, just a niggle at the back of my mind, but as I walked around again, that niggle began to coalesce into something more solid. I hurried back into the game room and paced across it with measured steps. Back in the hall, I did the same thing. I was right, and it might be a good idea to tell someone else before I vanished without a trace. Still no Hudson? I asked Tanner as I poked my head back into the kitchen to find him doing the washing up, aided by one of the maids. Tanner glanced at his watch. You're joking, aren't you? It's barely 11 o'clock. Can I borrow you for a minute? Borrow me? For what? I think I know where the would-be assassin might have vanished off to. That got his attention. Moments later, we were in the game room and I led Tanner to the left-hand wall. I was walking about the place and something was bothering me. Took me a while to realize what it was, but finally it came to me. It's bigger on the outside than the inside. What? I paced the room, I explained. The game room, wall to wall, side to side, is 18 paces long. Okay. But if you go out into the hall and pace the same distance, then it's 22 paces. Tanner frowned. They are thick walls, I suppose. I'm taking big steps. So? He hadn't seen the significance yet. There is a space 2, maybe 3 feet at this end of the game room that is unaccounted for. A secret passage? Tanner murmured. That's what I'm thinking. Is that possible? The look on Tanner's face was already giving me my answer. More than possible. This building has been inhabited by werewolves since well before the general amnesty. Back then, werewolves were in constant danger from vigilante bands hunting them down, and houses were built with escape routes factored in. They were called wolf holes, secret passages that led out of the property and emerged in some quiet street nearby. He shook his head. Of course we don't need them in this day and age, and most of them have just fallen into disuse, forgotten relics of a darker time. Well, darker time or not, right now it could save you and your brothers. Began to examine the wall. Come on, there must be a switch somewhere. Tanner joined me, running fingers across the carved wood paneling that lined the room. Something clicked and one of the panels swung open. Bingo! I used the torch on my phone to peer into the gloom beyond the panel. Double bingo! What is it? Asked Tanner, leaning over my shoulder. I pointed. On the wall was a clear handprint in dried blood. Now we know how the assassin got out of Ayre's house, I said. We just need to know where he went. You coming? Tanner smiled. Just let me put on some pants. Once Tanner was better dressed for exploring, we made our way through the narrow tunnel, Tanner struggling to negotiate his muscular form through. It was clear that the passage was not in regular use, but it was equally clear that it had been used by someone recently. Here and there we found the tail drops and smears of blood, from where King had clawed his assailant's hand. Let me go first, said Tanner, his appealingly low voice still more rumbling. In the enclosed confines of the tunnel. Because you're a man and I'm a weak, defenseless woman? I suggested. No, because there could be booby traps and my vision is better than yours. Especially in this light. I stood aside to let him go first and we carried on. Without really thinking about what I was doing, I placed a hand on Tanner's broad back as I followed him. It was a useful guide, but it was also comforting to feel his large, strong body like having a security blanket. I've always wanted to see one of these tunnels, commented Tanner. They're such an important part of werewolf history. We all know about them, but so few remain in this sort of condition. You must have known Ayre's house had one, I pointed out. Why didn't you look for it? It wasn't like it had been hard to find. Tanner shrugged. Werewolves investigation, you know. A werewolf's idea of finding a secret passage is to tear the house apart looking for it. The subject of investigation seemed to remind him of our earlier subject. I went to check in on Gray. He's all right. Still sleeping. The doctor thinks that's what's best for him. Apparently, he's not in any danger and werewolves heal fast. Hudson can fill you in on the specifics. Oh, don't worry, he will. I think that's probably why he's still in bed. He knows I'm downstairs waiting for him. Sometimes I think Father is right about us. I shook my head. No, you were right. Maybe he's right about some of the stuff you do, but he's not right about who you are. Thank you. I'm just parroting back what you already told me. Not for that. For Gray. I don't know what you did last night, but my guess is that I might not have two idiot brothers this morning if it weren't for you. And idiots though they may be, I would miss them. It was no problem. I didn't do much. Just a taxi service, really. From Hawkeye territory? Talk to Hudson. There was a brief silence from up ahead of me. Then Tanner spoke again. I have to ask. Why are you helping us? Are you complaining? Hell no. But when we asked for your help, you categorically refused to give it. Then a few days later you put your life on the line to save Gray and Hudson, and now you're in a dank tunnel under the city trying to prove our innocence in direct contradiction of the job you were hired to do. I'm not trying to prove your innocence, I corrected him. I'm just following where the evidence leads. Which is what we asked you to do and you said no. I don't like being coerced into things. Tanner nodded. I just thought it was because we were good in bed. Well, obviously that was part of it. Whatever the reason, thank you. We are grateful. The tunnel ended with an aluminum ladder propped against the wall leading up to a panel in the roof. Okay. I patted the ladder. That's proof that we are definitely not the first people down here since 1917. After you. Tanner climbed up and put his shoulder to the wood panel, which swung upwards. Heavier than it looks, he muttered as he squinted against the sunlight that filtered through. The panel fell heavily to the ground with a thump. It was backed with stone, so it looked like a paving slab. Where the hell are we? Asked Tanner as he hauled me out of the hole to join him. I breathed out in suppressed excitement. I'll tell you where we're not. Kenai territory. This is no man's land. The assassin was on his way home. To another pack's territory, Tanner finished the thought. I nodded. Perhaps it wasn't cast iron proof yet, but the evidence was adding up. The sons of Kenai King were not responsible for the assassination attempt. Chapter 10. My first instinct was to go to Kenai King, tell him what I had learned and get the guys off the hook, and that was probably what Tanner, Gray and Hudson would have wanted me to do. But on the walk back through the tunnel I began to think about things. If King believed as I did that one of the other packs was responsible, then that made this an official attempt at taking over the Kenai pack. That didn't call for an investigation, it called for war. I didn't want war, and I also didn't want to give up a mystery that I was just starting to get to grips with. I couldn't hold off telling King forever. That wouldn't be fair to the brothers, but I could keep digging and maybe get him a definite name. At least then all-out war might be avoided. Maybe. Besides, who was better placed than me to look into this matter? None of King's werewolves could cross the boundaries to investigate which of the other 3 packs might have been responsible, but a part wolf like me could. Really, I was doing him a favor by not telling him yet. How are you going to get an audience with the other pack leaders? Asked Tanner as we sipped coffee in the kitchen, a contrite-looking Hudson beside us. He and Tanner had had a frank conversation on our return, and I couldn't help feeling that Tanner had taken out a little of his anger at Gray, and his fear for his brother's safety, on the youngest of the Kenai heirs. That's where you come in, I replied. Us? Wondered Hudson. We can't even leave Kenai land. How the hell are we supposed to get you a meet with another pack leader? I was about to explain when the sound of footsteps on the stairs made us all turn, and moments later Kenai Gray entered. He held up a hand when his 2 brothers sprang to their feet to help him. I'm fine. I don't need help. Just breakfast. Hudson. Tanner jerked his head in the direction of the range. Don't see why I'm copping all the flack for this, muttered Hudson as he went to get more eggs and bacon. Once he's got his strength back, then I will kill him. There's something to look forward to, said Gray, taking a seat and casting a look in my direction. What's she doing here? She saved your life last night, I replied. Gray looked decently apologetic, though still sullen. I could forgive him for that easily enough now, knowing his story. Tanner then brought him up to speed with our morning's work, and he began to look at me differently, albeit reluctantly. Perhaps it was perverse, but I found myself really caring what Gray thought of me, and that change of expression to something approaching grudging admiration mattered a great deal. So what now? He asked. We were about to learn, Tanner replied. Miss Malone. I think you can call me Lana, I suggested. I had slept with 2 out of 3 of them. First name terms seemed the least I could offer. Lana, Tanner corrected, wants to go to talk to the other pack leaders. Which they're bound to like, Hudson put in. How? Asked Gray. Apparently with our help. Tanner turned back to me. I don't need you there in body, I explained, knowing that they could not cross borders without either breaking wolf lore or drawing a great deal of attention, which I did not want to do. I need something that says I'm on official Kenai business. A look of understanding passed across Tanner's face. He took a ring off of his finger and passed it to me. The Kenai seal. That the sort of thing you had in mind. I took the ring and smiled. Even with the Kenai seal to help getting in to see the city's pack leaders took some time and some phone calls, but a few days later I was heading west into Hawkeye territory. Hawkeye Jack was also known as One-Eye Jack, and not because he liked card games. He bore a resemblance to the Norse god Odin that he seemed to have decided to lean into, growing a straggly black beard shot with gray and wearing the long dark coat and broad-brimmed hat traditionally associated with the character. His pack lodge was less ostentatious than that of the Kenai, darker and more forbidding, as if the pack had deliberately set out to be the dark mirror of their wealthier neighbors. In the great hall, One-Eye Jack sat on a large leather swivel chair that had probably been made for a CEO, and yet attained the attributes of a throne when Jack sat on it. He peered at me through his one green eye, then took the ring. That I proffered. It had been enough to get me an audience, but would it be enough to get me some answers? Tanner, Hawkeye Jack asked, the first word he had said since I entered. They say he'll never be pack leader. I don't care about werewolf politics, I said, unless they lead to assassination attempts. I decided not to beat about the bush. You've got no reason to like Kenai King. In reply, Hawkeye Jack reached for his eye patch and lifted it. I didn't flinch. As he revealed the mangled remains of his right eye, a claw mark that started on his forehead and ran almost to his chin, scything through his cheek, marred that side of his face and had gouged an ugly cleft through his eye socket. We were supposed to be at peace, he said as he replaced the patch. Like I said, no reason to like him. Jack shrugged. That's been true for a long time. Why would I start trying to kill him now? You said yourself. Word is that Tanner will never be pack leader. Some call that an opportunity. Hawkeye Jack nodded. Yes, some might. But those who go about that opportunity with assassins are cowards. Are you calling me a coward, Miss Malone? He leaned forward and I realized that this interview had taken an unfortunate turn. No, pack leader. When I face Kenai King, One-Eyed Jack's voice rasped with emotion, it will be in a duel one-on-one face-to-face, all fair and in front of witnesses. My pack may benefit from gaining his territory, but that's not what I want from that bastard. Without warning, he lunged forward and grabbed me by the throat, dragging me close to his face. I want his eye. Just when I thought he might kill me there and then, he let me go and I took a few faltering steps back. Takes a lot to rattle me, but that did it. Hawkeye Jack stood, drawing an end to our meeting. If you catch the one trying to kill him, you'd be doing me a favor. I want King for myself. He turned to go but then spun back, leveling a gnarled finger at me. And don't think I don't know that Gray has been in my territory. You tell him that if I catch him, then Kenai or not, King's son or not, I'll skin him alive. I had known that the wolf packs all had their personal style that stemmed from their pack leader, but you had to enter the pack lodges to really appreciate how differentiated they were. Arctic Venus was like a different species to Hawkeye Jack. She was currently the only female pack leader. Werewolves have their own version of equality. If you can kill everyone else, then you're in charge regardless of gender. Based on her pack lodge, she had decided to accentuate the difference. It was not that the place was done out in pink lace and heart-shaped throw pillows, but there was something feminine in the elegant minimalism that characterized the room into which I was brought. Venus sat behind a curved glass desk in a chair swathed in white silk. The whole room was decked out in sharply contrasting black and white, and the furniture and ornamentation was fluid and lithe, seemed to ape the forms of nature in hard glass, marble and plastics. The only noticeable splash of color in the room was Venus herself. In body shape she was as fluid and minimalist as her room, slim, elegant and sharp-featured, but the flowing dress she wore, which clung to her body and hooded her head, was a bright blood red. She watched my approach down the long room through narrow eyes and a starkly made-up face, perhaps trying to disguise the passage of years contrary to appearances. She was past 50, or perhaps simply to maintain an image. There was something iconic about Venus. Unlike her fellow pack leaders, she had assumed control of the Arctic pack at a young age, barely 15, and had established a style and image that she had scrupulously upheld ever since. To keep power for that long, against treachery from within and attacks from without, took someone as hard as nails. That was Arctic Venus. I had been scared of Hawkeye Jack when he grabbed me by the throat, but I was scared of Arctic Venus from the moment I walked into the room. You've been to see One-Eyed Jack already, she said after I had showed her the ring. Wednesday, I believe. I wasn't surprised that she knew. And I'll be going to see Mackenzie Shaw next. Of course. Does King know that you are visiting us? I wanted to say, I'll ask the questions, but how did you say that to someone like Venus? Why wouldn't he? I answered a question with a question. It's no secret that King has little love for his sons. It stands to reason that any assassination attempt is going to make him suspicious, and perhaps that would lead him to hiring a half-breed like yourself. Now you're showing Tanner's ring around. I never said I was working for King. Venus made an airy gesture with her perfectly manicured hand, which would still suggest that King doesn't know you are here. I wasn't in the mood to be played with. If this had been one of the male pack leaders, I would have stood up for myself, but something about Venus's very femininity undermined my confidence. I had to get it back. If you didn't want to see me, then you certainly didn't have to, so either you want to play a game with me, in which case I'd rather just leave. I have a busy day, or you want to talk to me, so can we get on with it? Why would I want to talk to you? Because you know something is going on in the Kenai family and you think that you can trick me into dropping something useful. Venus smiled thinly. Ask your questions. My turn to play some games. I don't have any questions. For the first time I think I surprised Venus. No. I shrug. What can I ask that you can't deny? Did you hire the assassin who attempted to kill Kenai King, and who we now know for certain came from outside Kenai territory? If there's a subtle way of asking that, then I can't think what it is. As I spoke, I never let my eyes leave Venus's face, looking for reactions. But if my words rattled her, then she hit it well. For certain, she parroted back at me. The Kenai heirs are no longer under suspicion. King must be pleased. She paused, pursing her scarlet lips. Or must he? Wonder if an excuse to have his sons killed would have been convenient. What do you think? I think you've got more reason to frame King's sons than he has. It was as good as an accusation, the sort of thing that had made Hawkeye Jack pretty mad. But Venus barely reacted. You know, of course, that King took a large chunk of my territory not long after I became pack leader. I hadn't known that. We became pack leaders of our respective packs at around the same time. Venus went on. He was about 15 years older than me, of course, and we had very different attitudes. I wanted to hold things together after my father's death, to show stability for the Arctic. King wanted to make a statement, which he made at the expense of my pack. Long time to hold a grudge, I noted. Similar to Jack, the question would be, why wait this long for revenge? Venus laughed. I don't hold a grudge for that. I don't hold grudges for anything. Vengeance is for the weak and stupid. I believe in the Arctic pack, its stability and its endurance. If I took revenge for every petty incursion, then we would be in fights with every pack, fights we could not win. My job is to keep the Arctic secure. Let the others bicker amongst themselves and we'll be there to pick up the pieces. Did that mean she would do it or she wouldn't? I was left genuinely unsure. Chapter 11. Getting an audience with the Mackenzie pack leader was even harder than the last two, though for different reasons. I couldn't just call someone to make an appointment because the Mackenzie didn't use phones. The Mackenzie pack were considered something of an anomaly amongst urban werewolf packs, though most of the packs had their origins out in the country. Back in the day, werewolves had thrived in the wide open spaces of wilderness. When they moved into the towns and cities, they had their rough edges rubbed off. Big, ugly wolves who lived in caves even when human and seldom, if ever, wore clothes suddenly moved into Smart Park Avenue apartments, ate with a knife and fork and enjoyed a weekly game of squash with a man called Nigel. Was a pattern that had a lot in common with the process of immigrant assimilation. Within a generation or so, everyone was wearing Nike and eating Big Macs. But there were always a few holdouts, even in the heart of the city. The Mackenzie might not live in forests and attack unwary travelers, but they retained as much of their roots as they could in the modern world. Even knowing this, when I entered the great hall at the center of the Mackenzie Pack Lodge, I was still taken aback by the presence of a large fire. In the middle of the room, its smoke rising to a hole in the raftered roof, far above. Back in medieval times, when werewolves first came to the notice of humanity, they used to say that fire was the only difference between werewolves and actual wolves. Normal wolves were scared of fire, as most animals are, but werewolves used it and were drawn to it like humans. Beyond the fire, on a seat of carved wood, sat Mackenzie Sean, pack leader of the Mackenzie and the youngest of the pack leaders in the city. His hair was a mass of thick, unwashed, dark brown curls, and he wore a fur cloak that hung off his rangy, muscular frame. As far as I could see, and I didn't look too closely, he was not wearing anything else, and I got the impression that he was only wearing the cloak now in deference to my presence. Similarly, the guards who flanked him wore only a tartan blanket, loosely wrapped about their bodies, the tartan a relic of the Mackenzie's Scottish origins. Sean held out a calloused hand and took Tanner's ring from me. He examined it a while, then tossed it back. All right then, what? You've heard about the attempted assassination of Kenai King? The Mackenzie were less interested in werewolf politics and news of other packs. Sean nodded. Everyone knows it was one of his sons, or all of his sons. Unless everyone is wrong, then his sons will be the ones who benefit. Unless everyone blames them, I suggested. Mackenzie Sean shrugged, the fur cloak rising and falling about him. That's a lot of unless. But if Kenai King had wanted a peaceful life, then he Shouldn't have spent it robbing others of their land. He's taken a fair bit off of the Mackenzie, I pointed out. Sean bared his teeth in a snarl. In my uncle's day. Still rankles, I would guess. You're trying to pin this assassination nonsense on me? I'm just talking. You've no love for King or his sons, I'm guessing. They look down on the Mackenzie. That's no reason to start a war. I nodded, deciding to try a different tack. You're right. And a war the Mackenzie would have no hope of winning. If King and his sons were out of the picture, then it would be a straight shootout between Arctic and Hawkeye for who takes their territory. That makes you the only unbiased person I can ask about who you think might have taken that first step in trying to kill King. Hawkeye or Arctic? The rage flared across Sean's face. He probably knew that I was baiting him, but that didn't make him immune to it. The Mackenzie had an inferiority complex, tired of being seen as the runts of the litter simply because they lived more according to the old ways. You think we couldn't take the Kenai in a fair fight? His voice had a serrated edge like the blade of a saw. With or without King, with or without his worthless sons. Anytime. The Mackenzie may not be as large, but we're stronger, tougher, made hard by adversity. We don't sit around in our fancy houses on soft chairs eating fancy food. We are true wolves. And in a fight, no matter the odds, you always bet on the true wolf. Is that a fight you'd want to see? I asked, taking advantage of his anger. You bet it is. We tear them apart, and that's what they deserve. They've lorded it over us for too long. It's about time the Mackenzie took back what is rightfully ours and then took what's rightfully theirs for good measure. We're overdue for a war, and when it comes you'll find the Mackenzie the best prepared of all the packs. I thought that was probably true. So, King's death would be something you'd like to see? I pushed on. But Sean wasn't quite that unguarded. Yes, I'd like to see him die, him and his sons, on my claws and teeth. But that's not what you're talking about, is it? You're not talking war, you're talking about putting King in the ground by assassination and his sons in jail by deceit. That would start the war, I pointed out. Sean shook his head. That's not war, that's politics. He spat the word out, as if it had no place in his mouth. You think what you like of the Mackenzie. Call us names, everyone else does. You can call us savage, rough, uncouth. Say that we don't move with the times and are throwbacks to an age that doesn't exist anymore. And we are all that. But we're proud of it. Nothing is backdoor with the Mackenzie. Nothing is hidden. What you see is what you get. As he spoke that last sentence, Mackenzie Sean stood up from his wooden throne, his cloak hanging loosely from him, opening at the front to reveal more than I had wanted to see. His gaze now fixed on me. I don't like this sort of suggestion from anyone, least of all from some part wolf lackey of the Kenai. What gives you the right to come here and make these accusations? You think your powerful friends protect you? The only thing that's protecting you now is what you are. I'm not dirtying my claws with the blood of a filthy half-breed. There's no honor in that. Now get out. After I left the Mackenzie Pack Lodge, I went for a drink to think things over alone with my thoughts. Sean had been the most threatening of the three, but probably the least frightening, all bark and no bite. For all his big talk, I didn't think there was any way he would have killed me when I was carrying the ring of Kenai Tanner. For all he knew, I was an official emissary of the pack, and any attack on me was as good as a declaration of war, and I didn't think he was as ready for that as he claimed. On the other hand, with King dead and the Kenai caught up in a power struggle between the supporters of Tanner, Gray, and Hudson, then Sean might well fancy his chances. Was that what would happen? For all their disagreements and fraternal squabbles, it did not strike me as likely that the brothers would fight against each other for the role of pack leader. But it would not be about which of them succeeded as pack leader. It would be about which of them was blamed for King's death. Power-hungry members of the Kenai court would see their chance and start pointing fingers, and soon there would be an internal war within the pack. They would be easy pickings for the Mackenzie or for the Arctic. It had been difficult to get straight answers out of Venus, but her motive of revenge seemed to me stronger than any motive Sean had. She seemed the one most likely to carry out a covert attack and to get away with. But she also seemed the least likely to force the issue by taking steps. Venus had the power to wait, to bide her time rather than taking action. If I had to pick one who might be done waiting for King to die, then I would have picked Hawkeye Jack. He was impatient and his age only increased that impatience. He had arguably lost the most to the Kenai. An eye is no small thing. But as I sipped my drink, I had to admit that the bottom line was, they all had motives, they all hated King and his sons, they all wanted the territory. They all seemed to hate me as well, so the only thing I had accomplished that week was to make myself 3 new enemies. That should make life. Chapter 12. These same thoughts were processing through my head as I made my way home. Through the darkened streets. All that really seemed to have happened was that I had increased my total number of suspects from 3 to 6. They all had strong motives, they all had the opportunity, and yet there were arguments to be made against all of them as being responsible. It was starting to dawn on me that the main problem with solving the attempted murder of Kenai King was that the man himself collected enemies for fun. Everybody wanted to kill him, or at least had reason to. I had half a mind to go back to King and suggest that, rather than me continuing with the investigation, he should just try being nice to people for a change and the issue might take care of itself. To make matters worse, I was even starting to doubt myself where the brothers were concerned. All the pack leaders I had spoken to had been sure Tanner, Gray and Hudson, separately or together, had hired the assassin. That suspicion didn't come from nowhere. And while the pack leaders all had strong motives, personal, pack or both, they would likely still have to go through war to get what they wanted, while the brothers just inherited their reward. Still, I found it a lot easier to believe bad shit about Jack, Venus and Sean than I did about Tanner, Gray and Hudson. But was that just because I was developing strong feelings for the latter 3? The worries and ideas went around and around in my head like one of those vicious bicycles you hear about as I crossed out of Mackenzie territory and made my way through the no man's land that lay between it and Arctic streets. I stuck to no man's land, following Manver Street up in the direction of Kenai land and my home. I was tired from a long and frustrating day. I could almost feel my bed pulling me like a magnet. But my day wasn't over yet, and it wasn't about to get any easier. Out of the darkness jumped 3 men. I knew they were werewolves instantly, just from the way they moved, and I knew they weren't here to wish me a safe journey home because they were all wearing masks. For a heartbeat I froze, but no longer than that. One thing you learn quickly in my job is that turning and running is always the right thing to do. It may make you look like a coward or, if you have misinterpreted the situation, like a fucking idiot, but better to be an idiotic coward than a bold corpse. This is something you either learn quickly or not at all. It's not something that can be picked up through trial and error. I took to my heels faster than you could blink, and as I did I heard the communal growl behind me and knew that they had shifted form. I was now being pursued on foot by 3 werewolves who could outrun me like Usain Bolt racing a guinea pig. But as it turned out, they didn't have to catch me. Ahead, another 2 masked men stepped out to cut off my retreat. These ones stayed in human form so I could see the smug, cruel smiles on their faces. They were smiles that said this would not be a quick death. Some wolves like to play with their food. Automatically, my hand went for my shoulder holster. Not as impressive a weapon as the one I keep in my car, but a silver bullet is a silver bullet. But my hand found nothing. One thing you absolutely don't do when you are visiting the city's werewolf elite is carry a weapon. That's how you get shredded. On the other hand, it seemed I was going to get shredded anyway. Curse myself for deciding to walk rather than drive, but driving around the city in the day is pointless. You just get snarled up in traffic. What a stupid reason to die. With the wolves behind me and the unchanged werewolves in front, it didn't take me long to make my decision. I barreled into the 2 humans head down, hard as I could, taking one of them by surprise as my skull went into his belly with the force of a battering ram, knocking the breath out of him. The second man grabbed me by the collar and I twisted round to bite his hand as hard as I could, drawing blood. He was even more shocked than the first man. Werewolves don't expect to be bitten by humans. It's supposed to be the other way around. My gran would have been proud of me. Distracted by the pain, the man let go of my collar and I wrenched free, grabbing him by the arm and hurling him into the path of the coming wolves. 2 of them tripped and I didn't wait around to see what happened next. I was off again as fast as my legs could stand, but I could hear the approaching feet behind me and the panting breath of my lupin pursuer. I screamed in pain as outstretched claws scored down my back, not deep enough to kill but easily enough to hurt. I tumbled to the ground going ass overhead, banging my elbow to add to the general symphony of pain currently being played in my body. The werewolf roared down at me, terrorizing the poor vulnerable human. Go fuck yourself, I suggested. The werewolf pulled back with a look of animal surprise on its face, then chuckled throatily before growling to its friends, who were already hurrying over to where I lay. Desperately, I tried to struggle back to my feet, but a lazy sweep of a clawed hand took my legs out from under me, causing more howled laughter. They had all changed to wolves now, the masks suddenly incongruous on their elongated faces, and I was at their mercy. Any one of them could have killed me where I lay, but that was apparently not part of the game. I clenched my teeth against crying out as a claw was flicked against my bare cheek, instantly drawing blood. My jacket was ripped from me, baring my arms, and another pair of claws darted in to nick my skin. Still, I forced myself not to scream. I was going to die here, but I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction as well. These are the big bad wolves, are they? I muttered. 5 against 1? Guess you're pretty proud of yourselves. I don't know if it was because I spoke or just because they weren't having any luck in making me scream, but now one of them raised his paw to deliver the final blow. I closed my eyes. The growls that suddenly enveloped me were loud enough to split my eardrums, and my eyes started open to see 3 new werewolves attacking the 5 who had gone after me. I wasn't well acquainted with the Kenai airs in wolf form, and yet I recognized them straight away and my heart leaped at the sight. Wolf or human, they were magnificent. I had seen Hudson before as a wolf, when he was defending his brother, but it was still impressive to see him here now, in full battle mode. His golden hair flew about him. It was rare to see a completely blonde wolf as he leaped onto one of my attackers, his teeth flashing, his bright eyes fixed on his opponent, his claws tearing fur and flesh. Tanner too I had seen before, and in close-up when we had fought on our first meeting. Even beneath the thick, black hair and the clothes he still wore torn now by his change, I could see the phenomenal muscularity of his body, which he soon put to work. He delivered a ferocious backhand blow to one of my attackers, knocking the werewolf off its feet and sending it scurrying to the wall, whimpering and nursing its jaw. In the same movement, Tanner spun to face another of my attackers who flew at his jugular. Tanner caught the other wolf by the wrists, and for a moment they stood in standoff, roaring at one another, matching each other muscle for muscle. But soon enough, Tanner's strength told and he forced his adversary back, a look of fear starting to filter into the werewolf's eyes. Gray I had never seen as a wolf. He was as handsome an animal as his brothers, his dark brown hair shorter than that of Tanner or Hudson, his body thinner, his muscles more wiry but his strength no less. A wolf lashed out at him and he dodged, moving with speed and agility. His attacker tried again and this time Gray went underneath the blow, taking the other wolf to the ground, where the pair rolled about, horrid snarls echoing as they fought for the upper hand. My mind inevitably turned to Gray's recent injuries. He should have been in bed, not out here defending me, and yet he had felt this worth risking his life for. Despite myself, I couldn't help feeling special. Hudson hurled his second opponent against the wall, and the wolf scrambled back to its feet, returning to its human form as it did so, a sign of submission. In werewolves, like waving a white flag, he ran. There was a high-pitched whine, cut off by an unpleasant tearing, bubbling sound, and Gray stood up, his teeth and claws red with freshly spilled blood. I was pleased to note that none of it seemed to be his. Finally Tanner, his muscles bulging, lifted the last attacker into the air by his neck. The werewolf convulsed for a moment, and then hung still. Suddenly, the 3 wolves all looked up, as if they had heard something. In the mouth of an alleyway stood the wolf Hudson had been fighting, the one who had gotten away by changing into a human. He ran off as soon as he realized that he had been heard, but in that instant I had seen his face and he had been careless enough to take his mask off. Maybe that one clue would be enough to make this whole affair worthwhile, and perhaps that was what I had been waiting for. Either way, my body was done with being strong and brave. I passed out. When I came around, I found myself in a strange bed in a strange room. I leaned up to look around and shooting pains seared throughout my body, especially in my back, forcing me back to the mattress. From what I had seen of the room, I was pretty sure that I was in Ayers' house. So they had saved me and brought me home. Again I had to think that suggested they were not the ones who had tried to kill King. But again, they might just be trying to fool me, getting on my good side by helping me out. Raising that suspicion still further was the question of what the hell the guys were doing in that street in the first place. It could hardly have been a coincidence that they were there just when I needed them. Before I had a chance to contemplate this question further, the door opened, and Hudson walked in carrying a tray. He stopped when he saw me and beamed widely before calling back out the door. Tanner. Gray. She's awake. She's woke up. She's. He turned back to me. Are you all right? As well as can be expected. She's all right, he called back out the door, then hurried to my side, careful not to spill the glass of orange juice on the tray. I thought you'd like some breakfast. I have orange juice, Danish fruit. I didn't make anything hot, because I didn't know you'd woken up and I didn't want the food to get cold while I was waiting for you to wake. It's great, I reassured him. Could you maybe help me up? My back feels like a werewolf scratched the shit out of it. Funny you should say that, smiled Hudson. I winced as he reached behind me to help me up. He was rearranging the pillows so I could sit back as his brothers entered. The anxiety in their faces made me smile. Werewolves aren't good actors. They were genuinely worried about me. They cared. I took a long draught of orange juice, suddenly aware of just how dry my mouth was, and then looked up at the guys. Okay, first things first, were you following me? The three brothers exchanged guilty looks between them, seeming to pass the buck of who had to answer with their eyes, until Tanner manned up. Short answer, yes. Does the long answer explain why? I asked. The guilty looks once again bounced between the heir's eyes, and this time it was Hudson who had the courage to step up. I guess we were all maybe a little bit curious about your investigation. It is into us after all, and we thought, why not? I raised a disbelieving eyebrow. You thought it was worth violating the territorial boundaries of all three of the other packs and risking the start of an international incident, by which I mean all-out war with the Kenai, at the center of a three-way shitstorm because you were curious. More exchanged looks. Yes, suggested Hudson, not very convincingly. No. I shook my head. Don't get me wrong, guys. I am very grateful that you were there, more grateful than I will ever be able to express. But that is not why you were following me. Or at least not the whole story. There is some stuff that you are not sharing, and I would appreciate it if you shared. We didn't trust you. It was not what I had wanted to hear, of course, but Gray's words were the most honest the brothers had spoken to me so far that morning. Okay. We like you. Hudson, as ever, was there to take the edge off his brothers' statements. We like you a lot, and, well, we thought that we might be letting that get in the way of our good sense. I mean, you were investigating us for attempted murder, and yet we were trusting you based on, well, not very much. It was a problem with which I could identify, having been thinking the same things myself about my believing in them. And then, rather than being cautious around you, Tanner continued, I gave you the ability to go talk to the other pack leaders. No part wolf has that privilege. And I guess we started thinking maybe you set the whole thing up somehow. Maybe you took advantage of our father or of us. Maybe you wanted access to our enemies so you could sell them information or sell yourself as someone who could infiltrate the Kenai but had no loyalty to them. Maybe you'd been in collusion with one of the other packs from the start. We had a whole lot of maybes. Stuff you might have been up to. It just seemed like we'd taken a lot on faith, Hudson went on, because we wanted to believe you. So we followed you, Gray concluded. Can't have been easy, I said. Werewolves don't cross territories. The truth is that most could get away with it if they were just popping across to the shops or something, and yet they don't. That instinct is etched into their DNA. You stick to your own ground. For the brothers, it was more than an instinctual boundary. They were very recognizable, and if caught they would have been in serious shit. Tanner shrugged. If you have money, then all things are possible. He sighed. Probably wasn't even worth it. It's not like we could get into the pack lodges, that would have been suicide. But it doesn't matter. He sat on the bed beside me and looked me in the eye. We trust you. Not because you got tacked, but because we trust you. Sure, we met because you were investigating us, and it would be so easy for you to be using this to screw us over, but sometimes you have to put your faith in your instincts, and all our instincts say one thing: we trust you. The feeling's mutual, I replied, and like them, it wasn't because they had saved my life or because of anything I had learned about them or about the other potential suspects, it was simply that I trusted them. But if you were following me, then how come you took so long to help out when I got attacked? Heads were hung and feet shuffled until Hudson finally spoke. You know when you stopped for a drink? Yeah. So did we. Chapter 13. Like most active people, I suck at being ill or injured. Lying around in bed for days on end waiting to get better is just not for me. I need to be doing stuff all the time. I tried turning the case over and over in my mind, seeing if I could make some progress, but it just made my head hurt as much as the rest of me. As matters stood, I had nothing definite. I needed to be out there collecting evidence, not laid up here staring at the ceiling. Having the guys taking care of me was cool, and they made surprisingly good nurses, but my body was too beat up for me to take any more recreational advantage of staying with them. By day 4 I was feeling a lot better, but irritatingly, they all had some official ceremony at the Pack Lodge. Being a Kenai heir wasn't all fun and games. Fed up with lying in bed, I got up to have a proper nose about the room in which I had spent much of that week. It was clearly a spare room, not one inhabited by any of the brothers, and yet it looked as if someone had recently been using it as a makeshift office. There was a desk in the corner with a few pens scattered across it, and one of its drawers partly open with various papers sticking out, without touching anything, because as long as you don't touch, it's not snooping. I peered as far as I could into the drawer to take a closer look at the papers. They were covered in a scattering of erratic handwriting. I could barely read a few circled names in places. Most of the writing seemed to be stream of consciousness, making sense to the writer but to no one else. But one name leaped out at me: Yuko. The name of Gray's mate, who had been killed in the Hakai border raid. I stared at the bundle of notes, flaunting its secrets provocatively. Hudson had said something about Gray investigating the killing of his mate. Reams of notes, he had said. Was that what I was looking at? If it was, then it was none of my business. It had nothing to do with the King case, and I wanted to look at it more than anything else in the world. But I couldn't justify that intrusion into Gray's privacy. I turned away. Or could I? I turned back. Was it so cut and dry that this had nothing to do with the attempted assassination? It was another attack on the Kenai family, albeit a somewhat oblique one. Presumably, Gray spent time with Yuko at her home. Might the raiders have hoped to catch him there and kill him too? More to my current way of thinking, was it possible that whoever was trying to frame the brothers for the assassination had created a powerful motive for Gray by killing Yuko? When I thought about it like that, then it would have been irresponsible of me not to violate Gray's privacy. I grabbed the notes from the desk and carried them back to the bed. I then hurried across to the door and locked it. However much I had convinced myself that this was essential to the case, I might struggle to convince anyone else of it. The rest of the day I spent in bed, a pen clutched in my mouth to make my own notes where necessary, as I tried to understand Gray's desperate efforts. For a werewolf, he had been surprisingly thorough, which spoke volumes of his desire for vengeance. I doubted that there was a fact about the circumstances surrounding the raid that he had not found out. The problem was that all those facts were in no sort of order. The whole document was an ill-thought-out, haphazard mess of facts, rumors, ideas, and suppositions, all written down as they occurred to Gray. Nothing was linked up. On page 2 he mentioned an eyewitness account of a werewolf with a gray stripe on his head, and that description was repeated on page 27, making it a key piece of evidence. But Gray had failed to link the two thoughts. Werewolves just don't have organized minds. They think in straight lines. AB. For twisted thinking, then you need a human, or at least a three-quarter blend like me. Over the course of the afternoon I read Gray's notes, marking those passages that went together. I then went back through again, this time putting the facts into a clear chronology of events, figuring out which witnesses were to be trusted, matching descriptions to addresses. Basically, this was my day job. Only someone else had done the legwork for me, and by the time the brothers returned in the evening, I had a pretty good idea who was on the raiding party, which of the party had killed Yuko, and where that person lived, which left me with the question of what to do with that information. Telling Gray would surely result in him rushing back into Hakai territory with murder in mind. Keeping it to myself seemed a betrayal of someone who had saved my life. My musings on this were interrupted by a knock at the door. Just a second. I shoved the papers back into their drawer and then unlocked the door. You locked the door? asked Hudson, perplexed. Force of habit. I don't live in the best area of town. We wondered if you wanted to eat in your room, or come down and join us? I'll join you. Great. How was your day? I shrugged. Boring. Dinner was as much fun as I had come to expect from the guys. The more time we spent together, the more we seemed to enjoy each other's company. Even Gray was trying, though I still felt that sense of him keeping me at arm's length, not wanting to get too close, as if to do so was a betrayal of his lost love. He was, of course, the only one of the brothers I had not slept with, and I found myself idly wondering if I still might. I wanted to. However much I tried not to think it, I really wanted to. There was something compelling in his intensity, and even in his melancholy. Gray loved hard, and that was not such a bad trait. The fact that, in the drawer in my room, I might well have an answer to his troubles, or at least a way of laying that old ghost to rest, did needle at me through dinner, but I tried not to think about it. I still had the decision to make about what was best to do next. You look tired, Tanner observed as dinner ended. Thanks. I'm just saying. Could you not get any sleep today? I shrugged, trying to look innocent. I never had much luck at sleeping during the day. You should get some rest, said Hudson. It might have been my imagination, but I thought there might be a trace of disappointment in his voice, and that of Tanner too. Had they both hoped I might spend the night with them? That might have been awkward, unless they had hoped I might spend the night with both of them. Just the thought made an image of burning intensity flash through my mind's eye, but in the version I imagined it was not me with two brothers, but with all three of them. It was early morning when I awoke, the sun still not risen above the city. Turned over gingerly to go back to sleep. My wounds were healing quickly, one of the advantages of being a part wolf, but my back was still sore. As I moved, I noticed that my door was ajar. That was odd. I was sure that I had closed it the night before. I got up to close it, and my eyes were drawn to something that made my blood run cold. The desk drawer was open, the notes scattered to the floor. I ran over to rifle through the papers to see if my worst fears would be confirmed. They were. My own notes, the sheet with the name and address of Yuko's killer, were gone. I was dressed in seconds and running for the door. The chain of events seemed obvious. During the night, Gray had wanted his notes and crept into my room to get them. There he had seen my conclusions and had dropped the notes in shock, before stumbling out, too dazed or in too much of a hurry to even close the door. His next action seemed equally obvious, though I hoped I was wrong. He would head into Hawkeye territory to challenge Yuko's killer. Unless I could catch up and stop him. Perhaps I should have asked Tanner and Hudson for help, but given where I was going, that was just asking for more trouble. In cases of vengeance, a male revenging the death of his mate wolf lore could be flexible, but brothers coming across the boundary to help out was tantamount to an act of war. I had to do this alone. Fortunately, I remembered the address of Yuko's killer, and my car was still outside Air's house from when I had last gone looking for Gray and Hawkeye territory. Through the graying light of early morning, I drove like a demon, tires screeching on the asphalt as I barreled around corners, heading across town. Even at the stupid speeds I was going, the drive never felt longer, and as I approached the block where Yuko's killer lived, my heart sank. I could see a circle of bodies forming, a makeshift ring that was traditional for one of the oldest of werewolf customs, the duel. I slammed on the brakes and was leaping out of the car before it had fully come to a stop. Careless of safety, I elbowed my way through the crowd of amped-up werewolves hungry to see some blood spilled. Reaching the front row, I found myself staring out into the center of the circle, at the middle of which a fire burned, its flickering flames illuminating the leering faces of the spectators, as well as the two men who were stripping off their shirts, ready to fight. Werewolves heal fast, but Gray's body still bore the signs of his recent brush with death. He was not in peak condition for a fight, and one look at the other side of the ring told me that he needed to be. The name of the man who had killed Yuko was Reed Leon, and though I recognized him from pictures I had found in amongst Gray's haphazard investigation, those pictures had not done justice to the man. He was a foot taller than Gray, and his body, which was thickly haired even in human form, was broad with muscle. He bore scars from past fights on his body and his face, and his nose had been broken at least once. While Gray looked taciturn and solemn, Leon was grinning smugly, as if this was just another Saturday night for him. A few drinks, a bit of dancing, and a fight to the death. My gaze shifted back to Gray. Leon clearly had the more brute strength, built like a steamroller, but Gray's strength seemed more animal, more visceral, more agile. His lean, corded muscles knotted about his wiry limbs, and the fire threw the ripped muscles of his abs into sharp relief. None of which meant he had a chance. A wolf may be a lean predator, but if you hit it with a bulldozer, then that's relatively meaningless. I tried to push forward, to go and tell Gray that this was foolhardy and that he would be better off giving his findings, my findings, to the police. The crowd stopped me, holding me back so I could not spoil their fun. I opened my mouth to shout to him, but no words came out. As Gray turned, I had caught the look in his eye. Perhaps I did not know the brothers that well, and Gray least of all, but I knew them well enough. That look in Gray's eye, a look of infinite sadness, wedded to a fine edge by an unquenchable anger, told me how much he needed this. It did not matter to him. If he lived or died, he had to have this fight. I settled back into the crowd, keen to see but also keen that Gray should not see me. I wondered if that desire for justice and vengeance might be the deciding factor. There did not seem to be any formal way of starting the fight. There was no one officiating beyond the judgment of the crowd, who would see that all was fair, and no one sounded a siren, blew a whistle or dropped a flag. The two werewolves simply went from not fighting to fighting in a spontaneous instant. Gray coming to his toes, Leon starting to swing his brick-like fists. I winced as, having dodged the first two of Leon's swings, Gray was caught by the third, a blow hard enough to take him off his feet and send him tumbling to the ground, drawing a roar of approval from the strongly partisan audience. So nimble was Gray's recovery that his body seemed barely to touch the ground at all, as he rolled on his shoulder straight back into a standing position. Leon grinned, flexed his massive muscles, and shifted into wolf form. He had been a big human. He was a huge wolf lumbering on his sturdy back legs, his thick arms hanging heavy by his sides, almost long enough for the claws to brush the ground. He howled, then charged at Gray, who spun sideways with the agility of a dancer, shifting shape as he moved and slashing his claws across Leon's broad, hairy back. Yes, I cried, unable to help myself, and suffered the angry stares of every pair of eyes around me in the crowd. Some of them were probably noticing my part wolf smell. I met their stares. Fuck you. I'm here to see a fight. Leon threw back his head in a snarl of pain and rounded on Gray, hurling his bulk at the smaller wolf, but Gray moved fast, catching the massive arms and absorbing their bulky strength with his own. I saw the tendons standing out through his hair, his eyes almost red with effort. And then he was gone, suddenly pulling back and allowing Leon's force and weight to throw himself forward. Gray was the wilier fighter, able to use Leon's strength against him, able to back off when the situation called for it. But Leon was not a man to underestimate, and was one who did not like to be made a fool of. Fueled by his anger, he lashed out with his leg, catching Gray off guard and sending the Kenai air back, tripping over the fire, a bloody gash across his chest. My heart was in my mouth as he struggled to get back up again, burned and bloodied, but as I watched, new resolve seemed to flow into him, as if the face of Yuko had floated before his eyes. Now it was Gray's turn to act in anger, and Gray's anger was a formidable thing to see. It burned from him, it writhed in him like a living thing, and when he set it loose, it drove him on like a wild thing, snarling and hurling himself directly at Leon. Gray's claws rose and fell with vicious intent. Leon fought back, but suddenly it seemed that Gray was the stronger wolf, fueled by hate and long anticipation of this moment. He also seemed invincible, as if he did not even feel Leon's claws. I didn't think Gray was feeling much at that moment. The difference between the two was that Leon was now fighting to stay alive. Gray did not care. He was fighting only to kill, only to have his vengeance. As Gray's blows rained down on his torso, Leon let his guard down for an instant, and Kenai Gray seized his chance. Diving forward, Gray fastened his jaws to Leon's neck, and in one gory wrench of his head, he shredded the larger wolf's jugular with his teeth. Blood spurted forth, silencing the crowd. Gray backed off, limping, his breath coming in fitful wheezes. Only now, feeling the injuries that had been inflicted upon him, Leon remained on his feet, but seemed to be doing so more by force of habit than physical strength. As the blood gushed from his body, his movements were marionette-like, stilted and uncertain, his body slowly coming to terms with the fact that it was already dead. His collapse seemed to me to be in slow motion, toppling forwards and folding up in a crumpled heap, his fur matted with red blood that spread out from him in a pool. As I watched Leon's body change from wolf back to human. Werewolves never die in their wolf form. The last desperate act of their dying bodies is always to revert to humanity. It confirmed Gray as the victor. I looked at the crowd around me and wondered how they might take this. Gray shifted back into human form. His body bloodied but his head unbowed, his wounds apparently not as serious as the amount of blood suggested. He killed my mate. There was a murmur around the assembled viewers. Can anyone confirm this? Asked a voice. A number of other Hawkeye wolves spoke up to confirm it. They had been part of the same border raid, and yes, Leon had killed a female. Righteous vengeance, judged the first voice. You may pass back to your own territory unharmed, and this matter will be considered dead. Without another word, and with the entertainment apparently over, the crowd began to disperse. The fight had not gone how they might have wanted, but it was better than no fight at all, and no one seemed to have much liked Leon. Anyway, I stayed put watching Gray. He stood still as a statue apart from the rising and falling of his shoulders, his eyes on the bloody heap that had, until recently, been Reed Leon. He still did not look up as I walked over to him. I can't believe it's over. You must be pleased, though. A frown passed across his handsome features. I think I expected to die. To take him with me, but to die. I don't really know what I'm supposed to do now. Live, I suggested. He looked up, seeming to see me for the first time. What are you doing here? I came to stop the fight, I admitted. I decided not to try. Good call. He smiled. It may have been the first time I had seen him smile, and was certainly the first that I had seen him smile with such genuine happiness, almost serenity. Nothing's changed, and yet it all seems different. We drove back together. Most of the blood on him seemed to be Leon's, and he insisted that he had no need of a doctor. Gray sat in silence the entire journey, not angry or upset. A calm seemed to have settled across him. He almost looked puzzled. Every now and then I caught him shooting glances at me when he thought I wasn't looking. We arrived back at Ayre's house just as the sun was rising, and it was only then that Gray spoke. There's something I'd like to show you. He led me up through the house, up staircases I had never known existed, until we came out on the roof. There, the sunrise was framed by the buildings, creating a piercing shaft of orange light like a gateway to heaven. Gray and I sat down side by side to watch. We used to come here to watch the sun rise. Gray's voice was low but betrayed no sadness. I wanted to come here to say goodbye one last time. I looked at his face. He wasn't crying. He didn't really look sad. He had reached a point of clarity where Yuko was concerned. That was what this had given him, the ability to let go, and with the rising of the sun, the harsh pain of loss that had crippled him since Yuko's death would begin to heal. She was really something, he said. I wish I'd known her. I'm glad you didn't. Why? I frowned. He said nothing in reply. She's still gone. Why do I feel happy when she's still gone? I sighed. When we lose someone we love, that shadow never passes from us. You either live forever in the dark, or you learn to turn on the light. Good analogy. Thank you. It's what my mom told me when my gran died. I didn't mean for that, said Gray. I would never have found out who killed her. You found it out, I replied. I just gave you the name. Without you, I would never have been able to avenge her. I would never have been able to reach this place. Thank you. I didn't try to reject his thanks. It meant a lot to him to say it. It meant a lot to him that I knew how much it meant. I'm not sure I ever thanked you for saving me, for bringing me home. He smiled. Home. I'm glad you're calling it that. I hadn't even thought about it, but yes, Ayre's house, for all that I had been there only a matter of days, had started to feel oddly like home. I didn't have an unhappy upbringing, but finding a home away from home had always been difficult. My mixed ancestry had made it hard to fit in anywhere. Who would have thought that I might find a place to fit in at the heart of werewolf society? But it was only temporary. Well, while I'm looking into the case, I guess it's good to have a base of operations that's right at the heart of the Kenai. Is that all it is? I could feel his eyes on me. I said nothing, but my blush probably answered his question. I've been a jerk to you since you arrived. I shook my head. You haven't. I have. I've tried to be. I wanted to be. Why? Because I was attracted to you from the first moment I saw you. I haven't found another woman attractive since Yuko's death, and I tried everything I could to make you hate me so that maybe I could hate you. Now. He gazed at the rising sun. Now it's like a weight has been lifted by you, and when I look at you, all I can see is this beautiful, brave woman, and all I want to do. His words tapered off as we fell into a soft, gentle kiss, the early morning sun bathing us in its glow.